I'm sitting here with the lawyer for Volksraad, Mr. Paul Kruger. Can you tell me why did you start the VVVK and the Volksraad? What is the work about?
It basically started with my studies in international law and political science, where I realized what the process was for people who want to retain self-determination, what the process is to get back to self-determination. So it boils down to the fact that you have to exhaust your national remedies, peaceful remedies first, your international remedies, and thereafter you have performed yourself into a position where you can attain your self-determination by other means.
And why is this struggle for self-determination so important?
We have been in Africa now since the 1600s, and it was quite clear from early on to us that you cannot exist in Africa as a people if you do not govern yourself. If you don't have self-determination, if some other power controls your destiny, then in Africa especially, you will go under as a people. And that experience we have now with the black people, but earlier on we also had it with white people when the English Empire colonized the Boer people. So it is imperative to govern ourselves if we want to continue to exist as a nation.
And how is this struggle look now within the VVK? How are you working?
The VVK is an electoral commission, much like the electoral commissions organizing and facilitating elections in general. The VVK is a commission which facilitates elections among the Boer people only, the Boer Afrikaner people. And we have had one election in 2011, and we will have another election for another Volksraad this year. And the whole rationale behind this is to get people with a mandate, with a democratically elected mandate, to act on behalf of the Boer Afrikaner people and exhaust our remedies towards self-determination. The peaceful remedies have been exhausted now by the current Volksraad, which was elected in 2011. When the Volksraad went to the government and gave them the opportunity to peacefully resolve the issue of self-determination. Unfortunately, the South African government unilaterally, effectively suspended all the negotiations with the Volksraad. Thereafter, we have compiled a written report to the international community, inviting the international community to get involved and to play a mediating role in the dispute. Unfortunately, the international community as such have not yet get involved in a mediating role, which is why the Boer people now have performed themselves into the position of exhausting the other remedies, which are maybe not so peaceful.
And how big is the Afrikaner community or the Boer population here in South Africa?
One can actually only estimate that because it's very difficult to determine the figure with all the people that's left South Africa. Some have left on a permanent basis, some have left on a semi-permanent basis. They're still citizens, but they're basically never here anymore, or never here continuously. They work outside the country. But based on figures prior to 1994 and the estimates of people who left South Africa, who had to leave South Africa, they didn't leave South Africa because they just wanted to leave. They left South Africa because the conditions in this country became unbearable to them. But based on those figures, we can roughly, I would say, look at a figure of about 2 million Afrikaans-speaking Boer Afrikaner people that still remain in South Africa.
So when this country doesn't have a proper population count, how did you go through this vote amongst your own people to elect the Volksraad?
We have basically invited everybody to enroll as voters and to get registered on our voters list. So the VVK compiled a voters list from where people register and exercise their democratic right to vote for their own Volksraad then. We've also extended the invitation to register to people, Boer Afrikaners who left South Africa already. But since we obviously experience pressure on funding, etc., nothing which we do gets funded by the government, obviously, and nothing which we do gets covered by the mainstream media. So we have our difficulties regarding that, but all in all, we still registered about 40,000 Boer Afrikaner people, and we are expanding the voters' roll all the time by any ways possible, especially on social media and word of mouth.
So basically this Volksraad is the representative to speak for the Boer community in this negotiation against the government.
Correct. Exactly. Because we sat with a problem prior to having the Volksraad, prior to electing the Volksraad, we sat with a problem that many people pretend to talk on behalf of the Boer people. And many people and organizations, some of them very small, pretend to be a legitimate representative of the Boer Afrikaner people. And we have a strong Republican democratic tradition. So in our Boer republics, when we still governed ourselves in Boer republics in South Africa, no one could claim to talk on behalf of the people of their own accord. They had to be elected as such, as members of a Volksraad. And that is the only legitimate way in which a Boer can have a Boer can proclaim to talk on behalf of other Boers. So exactly that was the reason why we had the election. We said to people, we didn't limit the people who wanted to stand as candidates. We said to them, if you feel that you talk on behalf of the Boer Afrikaner people, or if you feel that you're a leader, or if you feel that you represent a significant portion of the Boer Afrikaner people, then stand in the election as a candidate and give the people the opportunity to mandate you democratically, and then we can accept you as a representative of our people in the struggle for self-determination. And that is how the current Volksraad came about.
And does the ANC government recognize this Volksraad?
The ANC government de facto recognized the Volksraad. The government already had negotiations with the Volksraad. The government took note of the Volksraad, by the way, in the way of correspondence. So there's quite lengthy correspondence between the Volksraad and the government. The governmental organizations which are concerned, like the Human Rights Commission, who is the government's instrument for self-determination issues, as proclaimed in the additional protocol which the government signed to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. The Human Rights Commission also had a sitting with the Volksraad, negotiated with the Volksraad, heard the Volksraad's charge against the government prior to the days when the government still did not, when the government still refused to talk to the Volksraad. There was a complaint lodged at the Human Rights Commission by the Volksraad against the government. So the Human Rights Commission entertained the charge against the government. So the Volksraad has quite a lengthy history of interaction with governmental and semi-governmental organizations and representatives, and also representatives of the international community. The mandate of the Volksraad as such has been confirmed by all those entities. No one has got a problem with the mandate.
So, under normal circumstances, self-determination implies also that you own your own territory. Do you make such a claim here in South Africa over a territory?
We definitely claim territory in South Africa, and the Volksraad, that was the Volksraad's message to the government when they met with each other in 2014, is to say to the government, there are territories in South Africa where our people are in the majority, and which is basically historically provenly a Boer territory. There are such territories, and although they might not be very large, although they might not border against each other, it's possible to identify those territories if we sit together and have workshops to determine those borders. And that was the invitation extended by the Volksraad to the government. The government then undertook, in the form of Cyril Ramaphosa, who was the vice president at that stage, to continue the talks with the Volksraad and to go into this matter. And unfortunately, the government, after 2014, basically unilaterally broke off the process.
Did they give any motivation to that?
Not really. They came with the argument through the state attorney's office that the government, as such, cannot initiate legislation. Legislation must be lodged through Parliament, and that we, as the Volksraad, must go to the South African Parliament to get the necessary legislation in place in terms of Section 235 of the Constitution. I then wrote them back a letter pointing out the fallacy and stating to them that the South African Constitution, I think it's in Section 82 or Section 87 thereabout, which lists the responsibilities of government in the form of the president of the country, explicitly states that the initiation of legislation is one of the government's responsibilities. So it is an absolutely invalid point, and I've pointed it out to them in a legal letter quite clearly, which they didn't have really an answer to.
Yeah. And how do you see the challenge of having lots of small independent areas or bubbles or whatever you want to call them, instead of having one solid?
It's difficult if a population is spread out so evenly throughout a large territory as in South Africa, but it's not impossible to identify areas where we are in the majority. It might be not very large areas, but on the other hand, you have, for example, very large tracts of land in South Africa in the possession of the government, which is basically state-owned property, and which is devoid almost of people. They could easily have accommodated us. I'm thinking of a place like the Kruger National Park, which is basically the same size as Israel, or I think it's even bigger than Israel. That's just one example of a place which is almost devoid of a population, a human population. But there's many tracts of land in South Africa which could have come into the fray of a negotiation, giving and taking. But the government just didn't go into that.
Would you accept a land area with no infrastructure?
Infrastructure is not our biggest problem at this stage. Infrastructure is something which you can create. It's very difficult if you don't have infrastructure, but we've been there before. I mean, when the Boers developed the republics, of which the Transvaal and the Orange Free State was only two of them. We've had something like 13 independent republics in southern Africa, established here since 1838, and the latest one was created in the 1880s. But those republics were devoid of infrastructure at all. We came here into a wilderness, an absolute wilderness. There wasn't a single road, not a single building, not a single bridge. Nothing. There was nothing here except barren wasteland. So the infrastructure that is in this country was created basically by the Boer people, and we can do it again, although it won't be very, very easy nowadays. But that's not our big problem. Our big problem is that we are being barred from governing ourselves and from being what we have to be and what we cannot excuse ourselves to be. We are white people. We are from European descent, but we've developed in South Africa as a separate nation. There's no nation in Europe like our nation. We are a complete, unique and individual people. And we have the same rights than any other peoples in the world. If the Chinese have the right to govern themselves, and the Swedes and the Norwegians and the Russians and the Zulus and whoever, the Boers also have the right to govern themselves. And that is basically the right which we stand on.
So what are you going to do now after when the government denied further negotiation in 2014?
We've, as I say, we've extended an invitation to government, to the international community to play a mediating role. Unfortunately, the international community haven't taken up the role. So now the people went to formulate a second mandate to a new Volksraad, who is to be elected later in 2018, in October 2018. And that mandate is described as the post-peaceful process. We've exhausted now our peaceful remedies. Now the other remedies have to be exhausted, and I can just mention one example. The whole question of resistance, passive resistance, is one of the avenues. But there are many other avenues, and we will have to be guided by circumstances. In my mind, I think we are very fast approaching a situation of complete anarchy in South Africa. And during the process of anarchy, it might well be that the Boer people take things into their own hands whilst defending themselves and creating a lasting constitutional solution in the process as well. Something like unilateral independence declaration or something of that sort is not impossible if the current situation of anarchy deteriorates so much that we don't have a choice but to take up arms to defend ourselves.
Do you see that as a possible future in this post-peaceful negotiation, that civil war could occur?
Well, civil war is almost a reality already in South Africa amongst the black peoples. You have ANC supporters, EFF supporters, BLF supporters. They all want more or less the same thing, but they are so violent in their opposition to each other that they burn down whole tracts of territory, that they burn down whole towns, that they create industrial and labor chaotic situations. They close down roads, and I'm not talking about small roads, they close down the main arteries of the road network in South Africa on a constant basis. So we are so near to a situation of complete anarchy already that I can very much imagine a situation which you mentioned now.
I hope it won't go to that, but thank you very much for answering our questions.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah, I wish you the best of luck.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.